The reason I didn't want to say what I thought is because I want to hear you tell me what you thought of the movie first. So I'm passing it back.
Okay, so you just Uno reversed me.
Yep. I want to hear what you have to say.
How high off of something would you jump?
If a magician does the same trick to the same audience over and over again, it loses its appeal. So here's part of the reason why, and this is something I hinted at when we talked earlier, is that the pandemic drastically affected filming of this movie.
The Tom Cruise hype has probably never been bigger.
So we are going to get heavy into spoiler territory soon, so just be aware of that.
Welcome to Backseat Directing,
where we talk about movies, TV shows, comics, and more.
We're your hosts,
Andrew
and Aaron.
And we post new episodes every Monday and Thursday.
And on this episode, we're reviewing Mission Impossible Dead Reckoning Part 1.
3, 2, 1, action. Aaron, we are here with a very long-awaited, very special episode on this new Mission Impossible film. Your mission today, should you choose to accept it, is going to be to rate, review, and discuss this movie for the duration of this podcast.
I accept.
This message will self-destruct in 5 seconds. What if I just exploded?
Our equipment explodes? I think more likely.
I think you'd be more upset.
Probably. All right, Andrew, you've been really excited for this movie. I feel like you've been getting pretty pumped up over the last week and a half. You watched the last 3 movies all in one day. I watched 2 of them in one day, and then one of them I just finished yesterday, the day before seeing this. We watched this Wednesday, the week that it came out. This episode's coming out Thursday, so literally the next day. We're fresh, right? We just got out of the movie. What did you think? What were your initial thoughts of this movie? Did it live up to all the hype that you started building for it? What'd you think?
All right, so you having no idea, because we kind of went out of this movie silent, unveiling to you.
Yeah, it's weird. Normally we talk about it a little bit beforehand, whether it's an older movie or we're just getting out of the theaters. We normally spend time after the theater, the theater, just talking about it. And we didn't do that this time. We had to hurry up and get over here. So we decided to hold off our opinions until we're live on air. So I really don't know if you liked it, hated it, thought it was okay. What?
So I feel like you do, as a very generous co-host, toss the mic to me first, often. Ooh. So in this case, the reason I didn't want to say what I thought is because I want to hear you tell me what you thought of the movie first. So I'm passing it back.
Okay, so you just Uno reversed me.
Yep, I want to hear what you have to say.
Well, I'm going to lay down a skip, and I want to hear what you say.
Draw 4.
Dang it. Okay, first reactions. The stunts were amazing. The music, sound design, I loved. The story for me, I don't know if I like it that much when movies make it part 1 and part 2. I feel like that's the biggest downside for this movie, is that it kind of felt like it was drawn out when maybe it didn't have to. But overall, it was a fun, exciting movie. Definitely action-packed. I love the actress. She plays Carter.
Hayley Atwell.
Yes, she did fantastic.
She is stunning, by the way.
Yes, definitely. She's easy on the eyes, that's for sure.
And interestingly, this movie doesn't put her into any revealing clothing, which would be like the normal trend for like an action movie. So I thought it was kind of
wearing long sleeves the whole time.
She's wearing
shirt.
I feel like she's wearing like mirror outfits basically to what Tom Cruise is wearing,
yeah,
which is very rare for male and female like stars in this kind of movie. And she's even wearing like the vest and button-up shirt, like which is a similar outfit he's wearing the whole time in Rome.
I feel like now that you mentioned it, most of the women were pretty much wearing similar things to.
There really wasn't anything revealing for Palm Clementif either, or for Ilsa Faust, actress.
Yeah. But yeah, that's kind of my initial thoughts for the movie.
While we're doing initial thoughts, we're trying to avoid spoilers, by the way. So we are going to get heavy into spoiler territory soon, so just be aware of that. I'm not giving you like any of you guys an exact minute. I wish I could, but I'll try to recognize it before we do anything too spoilery.
You'll know when we get into spoilers.
You'll know when you'll hear it. But so my general thoughts on the movie very similar to yours. So that's why I wanted to hear what you said first. You asked me originally what how it landed against my expectations. I feel like it fell short. But with that in mind, if you're planning to go see Mission Impossible, as during its theater run, my expectations were very high. So don't take that to mean that it was a bad movie because it fell short of my expectations. I just watched, in direct order, in the same 24-hour period, I watched Ghost Protocol, Rogue Nation, and Fallout, which are phenomenal movies. They continue to raise the bar with stunts. They continue to raise the artistic nature of the filming, and they continue to keep it a high-octane thrill ride throughout the movie. So this one, I expected more, and we can get deeper into why, but I feel like they didn't necessarily deliver on what I felt like I was promised as a viewer. I heard people say that the best was yet to come, and I feel like the best was kind of in the trailer. Seeing some of the behind the scenes, we get to see Tom Cruise doing that, like those high speed, low to the ground gliding and that motorcycle jump, which I know he did in real life, but I feel like they showed extraordinarily little footage of in the actual movie, where you have in-camera shots of your actor doing those things, and they didn't utilize them, in my opinion. Like, we got to see that straight drop from Tom ride the motorcycle off, which is an incredible shot, but they could have done so much more with that. We got that 5 seconds of him falling. It is beautiful and amazing. I don't want to take away from that. But the next thing we see of him, really, we see a little bit of him in the air with the wind blowing in his face. That could have easily been produced in a studio because it was such a tight shot. And then we see him blast through the side of the train. I am spoiling it now. But my thing is they have all these, but a lot of this is stuff that we saw behind the scenes in videos beforehand. But they didn't make use of that in the movie. And the same thing with what I mentioned earlier, the low to the ground gliding, that he actually did that, and we just saw so little of it in camera. They didn't take advantage of it.
Again, spoilers. That was at the very end, the like low to the ground gliding stuff, and that was like seemed very much like an afterthought. Like it didn't seem like he was actually there flying it. Like, I was thinking when I was watching, I was like, wow, he has practiced this for hours and hours and hours, and it's such a small part of this movie.
Yeah, I saw a cameraman and behind the scenes doing the high-speed gliding behind him, and they're struggling to keep him in camera, and they're working so hard on this. Why work so hard on something to not actually make it a big part of the film? I mean, the Halo jump in Fallout is iconic. It's a big sequence. It's a big blockbuster scene in the movie. It's like your jaw drops when you watch it. So I would want to focus on it.
We spend a long time in the Halo jump.
The whole time in there. We follow them from the plane, straight from all the way from the plane all the way to the ground, like 10,000 feet.
Rogue Nation, we spend a long time with him holding his breath too. That was one of the big stunts there. We spend a long time with him holding onto the side of the plane. And going back one more to Ghost Protocol, we spend a lot of time with him scaling the side of the building.
And that's what I live for, is those sequences. The three that we just talked about, that is the lifeblood of Mission Impossible. That's what I go there for. And I just felt like in this movie, Dead Reckoning, and maybe part of it's like you said, I don't like the split nature of these movies. Maybe part of it's that they're saving it for part two, saving these other things they have in mind. I don't like Hollywood going to that trend of all these part twos. It's to make more money, I know, but please stop doing it. Make one good movie.
I feel like the only movie that has done it like exceptionally well is Infinity War Endgame.
Yeah.
And
felt like individual movies.
Yeah. And it just felt like, oh shoot, like that stopped. It didn't feel like we were coming to an end, but it didn't answer things. It literally felt like I just got a complete story, but the story's going to continue.
Yeah.
But even with this Across the Spider-Verse, like you were saying that, like, that's one of the things that took away from that one, of you not liking that as much as the first one.
Yeah.
Is that
not being finished.
Right.
So I want to get more into this specifically and save some of these talking points for when we get into our rating system.
Yeah.
So I'll leave a little bit of that for now.
So let's go ahead and kind of jump into our structure that we have when we review movies, and that's starting off with the movie summary. And I thought it would be funny if I would just read the IMDb description, because it says Ethan Hunt and his IMF team must track down a dangerous weapon before it falls into the wrong hands. Do you know which Mission Impossible movie I just read that for?
Was it any of them? Was it Ghost Protocol?
It was all of them.
It's so true.
But that was for Dead Reckoning. But anyways, to kind of elaborate on that is this villain or weapon that they're like chasing is this entity. It's this kind of AI machine that started learning and taking over. You know, like how this goes. Like there's a bunch of movies with this in there. You know, like this isn't anything new, which is fine. But yeah, it kind of learned how to develop on its own, and it ends up now it's like this powerful thing, but there's a key to unlock it. So they're basically spending the entire movie searching for that key to unlock this device, and whoever has that key is the most powerful person on the planet, especially if they work for a government. A lot of governments are after this key. Now,
The entity.
Yeah, the issue that Ethan Hunt and his team run into is that they don't know what the key goes to or where that hole for the key is.
Yeah.
So they're chasing down the key, but then they're also chasing down the information to find out what this key actually unlocks. But the whole time they're kind of encountering people from Ethan's past, and then also this entity, which is that AI device that's hacking into their system and making things difficult for them. And
then also the entity is influencing and working with these real humans played by Paris, played by Pom Clementif, and then the other gentleman from Ethan's past, and to come after Ethan and his team. And then also the US government, the CIA, I believe, has a team of agents going after Ethan because they believe he's gone rogue again. There's so many balls in the air, which there always is in Mission Impossible.
Yeah,
but
I mean, it's very similar to Ghost. It's very similar to all the other ones.
Where the Russian officers following him in Ghost. I felt like I had a harder time following it in this one. I had a harder time, and we can talk about that in story, but I had a hard time with everything going on. How did this person get here? How did this person find out they were here? I feel like there was just some plot elements that weren't concrete.
Yeah, I think they did a better job of explaining some of those little things in previous movies than in this one. But yeah, let's move on to kind of the next section here, and that's our ratings, earnings, creators. So this movie obviously came out this year, 2023. It's rated PG-13. It's 2 hours and 43 minutes long, which that seems to be the average for movies now, right? Like
These big blockbuster
almost
movies.
3 hours. I looked it up. Oppenheimer, 3 hours on the dot. You know, like these movies are all really long now.
I think
which I'm for it.
I think they're convincing fans that it's more worthwhile to spend your money if you're getting more movie.
Yeah. Especially in this case, because there's going to be another one coming out afterwards.
But like you said, it didn't need to be that long. I do feel like it was stretched.
Yeah. Even the duration was fine of the movie. Like it being 2 hours and 43 minutes, that was fine. But the story itself, I think, could have been crunched down, maybe some pieces taken out, and then put in the ending that we haven't seen yet is something a little more complete. You know, This seemed like we're dealing with the same thing the whole time. You know, let's move on to the next step. But IMDb has it at a 8.2 out of 10 right now. Again, this is literally like the first day that it came out. So that will probably adjust. I think most of the other ones are, which we just did an episode recapping all of the first, 6 of the Mission Impossible movies that you can check out.
Make sure to watch that.
Yeah, I think episode 103. So you can check that out. But I think all the other IMDb ratings have it at like a 6.4 to like a 7.9 or something like that. So this is floating just above that. I'm sure it'll kind of level out here in a few weeks. Rotten Tomatoes for the critics has it at 96% with 266 reviews, and a 94% for the audience score with 500 plus reviews. Again, first day, that'll change probably quite a bit.
It's already been dipping from
Yeah.
99 down to 94.
Yeah, I feel like when movies market their Rotten Tomato score before the movie comes out, like it's like, guys,
Hardly
what are you
anyone's
doing?
seen it.
Yeah, like that's not the Rotten Tomato score. Like you can't just put that on there. Like you can't look at the Rotten Tomato score until probably at least a month of the movie being out, you know? So that kind of brings us into
Our personal ratings.
our personal ratings here. So we break movies down in 6 categories. This helps us have a non-biased as much as possible, a non-biased rating for these movies. And it helps us be a little bit more detailed of like which aspects of the movies we really liked and which aspects that maybe we weren't as big of a fan of. So starting off, we have story, and I kind of started this episode off by explaining I think the story was a little bit lacking compared to some of the other Mission Impossible movies. So I had it at a 6.5.
I give the
Out of 10.
story a 6 out of 10.
Okay,
And
very close.
The reasoning for that is the Mission Impossible series has always had, I don't even know if I necessarily call it a problem, but a tendency to repeat itself, similar to like the way Star Wars repeats itself. It tells a similar story. They're always going after the launch codes. They're always going after the plutonium. They're trying to stop a weapon, like you said, from getting into an enemy's hands. I feel like in this movie, they tried to mix it up, which I appreciate the attempt. The entity is basically the villain. The AI is basically the villain, which is a big trend in like society and technology right now is what is AI? Like it's always been a sci-fi theme, but it's now a very real world concept of AI. And is it scary? So this movie's touching on that, I think, is very poignant and very interesting. But to me, AI in this movie, predicting all of what they were going to do, and yes, it's scary, but it also just seemed like Solomon Lane, but less cool because Solomon Lane was doing it as a human being. Like Solomon Lane was predicting what everyone would do without software, without engineering, without using the numbers and the data. He just intuited it with like this brilliant human genius. Yeah. And I think being so attached to Solomon Lane and seeing like the twist villain of the technology still basically just being the tech version of Solomon Lane to me was a little bit disappointing, and also just a little bit too much of a sci-fi element. It felt like Minority Report, which is another Tom Cruise movie, which is just like sci-fi elements predicting the future.
I feel like it was almost underused and definitely underexplained. Like it kind of just came out of nowhere. I'm not really sure how it's related to Gabriel. Is that the guy from the past? I'm not really sure how he's connected to this.
How did he know about it? How's it communicating with him? Why is he worshiping it? Because Ethan said called it his god.
Yeah.
How did it know for him to jump off of the train at that exact moment and land? There's so many elements of human error that computer could not calculate for to know on his watch the exact second for him to jump and land in that truck bed. When that happened, I just kind of like gasped and was like, this is a little ridiculous. Like he's off by a second and he's splattering on the ground instead of landing in that truck bed.
Yeah, and there's been so much stuff that they had to calculate for, like they put the speed of the train, like it's just going.
Was he like, did he have an earpiece in and the entity was like, all right, turn the speed up now and like pull the whistle now? Like, cause
it didn't seem, that would have been cool. Like where it's like really calculated, where we're hearing it, like kind of walking them through.
Like Eagle Eye basically, which is a great movie.
I was going to bring that up. Eagle Eye, Enemy of State. I think those two movies did the AI or Big Brother thing like really, really well. And if Mission Impossible wanted to go that route, I wish they would have done it a little bit more.
All in.
Yeah.
Well, the one thing that Eagle Eye does, I think that's really fantastic, is they give it a voice. And they use like Benji's voice, I guess, speaking as the entity. But I think Eagle Eye, that AI had its own voice, a voice actress. And I think that was a strength of it. It became a character.
It was his own character. Right. Yeah. Exactly. Yeah. And I really don't know why Gabriel was in this movie.
I guess just to be like a physical representation of something to fight.
Well, it was like really cool that it brought something from the first movie and it was like a connection to Ethan, but like it felt forced.
But also what connection? Because to my understanding, that was to me a pro of the story was them giving us more insight and backstory into Ethan's character that I feel like we've never really gotten, who he was before the IMF. And then they give us insight into the IMF as a whole and their agents with Haley Atwell's character, Grace. Like she's a representative of what it's like to enter into the IMF. They unveil to us, to my knowledge, for the first time, that they were all criminals beforehand. Luther, Benji, they were criminals that were recruited by the IMF for their unique skill set, something that's been touched on in history that the CIA supposedly has done a lot, or even like the CIA recruiting like German scientists after World War II, people with a unique skill set. The IMF is taking these people. And I feel like that was very cool to see, like, to kind of get a background and insight into the mind of your mission, should you choose to accept it. It could also be layered as, should you choose to accept it, but if you choose not to, you're going on the run, you're getting arrested for your past crimes that we're pardoning you for.
Be hunted.
Yeah, a really interesting thing in that Insider video from that I sent you was that the CIA agent who does that interview says that CIA agents are actually in the real world very similar to criminals. The only difference is that agents are given permission to break the law by the government. So espionage, he says, like inherently is breaking the law. You just are like basically excused for it in advance.
Yeah, you're the parents' favorite.
Yeah. So that makes a lot of sense for this movie, for these characters, like them to all have that backstory. But to learn that in this movie was really cool, I thought. And then to get some like emotional backstory to Ethan, like I want to know what actually happened in that flashback they keep showing us, because I do not recall that in the previous installments.
It's from the first movie, but it's been so long since I've seen it. I don't really even remember it. But as I said in our last episode where we recapped the franchise, like these movies like keep getting better and better, especially the last three are like really, really good, not including this one. The three before that are really, really good, but they all have a very similar story, but somehow they were able to still like keep us interested. But some reason during this one, I was like, okay, the IMF doesn't want them again. There's no assistance. They're on their own again. Like, it's just the same thing, but I feel like it wasn't paced as well. When we were talking about Ghost Protocol in our last episode, I was telling you that some of my notes when I was watching that is that the pacing is really good. They take time to put us in this tense situation, but there's very little to no music. They're going really slow, specifically like when they're pushing down the hallway with that like green screen thing. And then when he's like running out of the out of the hospital, and he like stops on the ledge for a second, and the agent pops out. And it's like, you didn't really think about this, did you? Like there was that time for us to take a moment and be like, oh, like this is really dangerous. This is really hard. Ethan has a hard time doing this. We got that a little bit when he was at the top of the mountain, him like kind of like, a deep breath. Like, you really want me to jump right now?
And thinking, planning as well.
Yeah. But it just didn't feel the same as it was in the other movies.
Well, it went out the window in some moments too. Because like you said, I feel like at the end, it wasn't very patient or this thought out the same way. When he jumps out and does the gliding, when he jumps out of the plane and does the gliding, it's kind of, without that patience and thoughtfulness, it seems a little goofy. Him just like front flipping out of the plane and then gliding away. It seems like a cartoonish way to escape the situation, which the whole series is cartoonish, but
it works.
When they build it the right way, I accept it. I'm like, oh, he got into this situation, he had to do it this way. He had to, scale the side of the building because of this, this, and this. That just felt like, well, they put this other thing in his backpack and now he's getting away in this kind of silly way. Yeah. Without them showing it too, like, and building the excitement and just kind of rushing to it, it felt silly.
I feel like the key stuff was very repetitive too. It was very interesting in the first act.
There's 100 shots of the key.
Yeah.
I don't know if they were just proud of that design of that prop.
It was pretty cool.
The key was it was on screen so much. It was a bigger character than Tom Cruise.
Definitely bigger than the Entity.
Yeah.
But the opening act where they're in the airport or wherever with the key, like, that was really cool. But then I feel like we got to see that scene again and again and again. I did like how we got to see some of the small shots of them doing the sleight of hand, like when she put it in the jacket, like, that was good.
Yeah.
And she was like, it's probably where you'll never look or think to look, and it's like, okay, that was really cool. But like, then what?
Yeah. The thing is that, like, if a magician does the same trick to the same audience over and over again, it loses its appeal. Like, the sleight of hand was very entertaining when Tom Cruise first showed us, but they beat that nail. Like, they kind of were kicking a dead horse at a certain point.
Yeah, let's go on to our next category here, and that is acting. So this kind of goes into all the characters' performance, how they got into character. But then there's a different aspect with this because Tom Cruise is his own stunt double. Like, he's doing these insane, crazy stunts. So how big of an impact did that have on you when you're considering your score for your acting?
It's a huge impact. I mean, you said something before the movie that kind of impacted me in the other direction, though. Like, when we sat down for our seats, you said, I want to see Tom Cruise give like a less stoic performance. Basically, I want to see like big emotional scene from him. And so after you said that, it really made me think that the franchise is missing that a little bit for the last couple movies. And so I was watching him throughout this movie, and it did feel very stoic in a way that
I ruined the movie for you.
in a way that I hadn't previously noticed. So I ended up giving the acting score a 7 out of 10 because I don't feel like any of the acting was distracting from the movie.
Correct.
And plus I have to count in the stunts as being incredible. But then like in scenes, and huge spoiler here if you're still listening, I'm sorry, skip ahead 20 seconds. But when Ilsa Faust dies, that should have been.
I wanted to see him yell.
Yeah.
You know, like I want to see him like just start bawling. Like this is what the third girl that he's lost, you know, like I want him to show that emotion, you know, because I know I would have for sure.
Yeah.
You know, and like I want to be able to connect to the character and like what they're going through. And it's okay if he's a stoic person and he doesn't express emotion like that very often. But 1 out of every 7 movies, like
we hardly even got any shots of his face in that scene. And skip ahead maybe a couple more minutes if this is where you're at. But it was totally lost on us, and they didn't even reference it really for the rest of the movie. I mean, like Benji wiped his tears away, and that was kind of the end of it for her storyline. He like moved on, which I feel like that is one of the most upsetting story elements to me as well for Ilsa Faust's character to go, because I feel like they just thought they were replacing her with like a younger model, basically. Like they gave us Haley Atwell, who is great, and this is no discredit to Haley Atwell, but I really like the character of Ilsa Faust. I grew to care about her in Rogue Nation and Fallout, and for them to like pull the rug out from under me, and she was still such a mystery. We still knew, I feel like, very little about her, and there was very much to grow there for the actress.
You never know like what side she's on, you know, like.
And then now she's gone. Like I don't know. I just feel like it was very much a waste for us to lose that character and just move on with somebody new. Because what is Ethan supposed to fall in love with Grace now? I mean,
they seem pretty close.
Are they trying to just
at the end?
Do these connections just keep coming for him like easy? You know, does it just flow like water? Because I feel like it shouldn't. Not for a normal person, like a sane person, you know?
And like he's clearly not normal in this universe, in this movie, you know, like
but he cares deeply about people.
Definitely like is able to close his emotions down to be able to focus on the mission or task at hand. But
also he's not, because he refuses to sacrifice or treat people coldly.
Yeah, I was just gonna bring that up. Like he won't let his friends die, like no matter how important the mission is, you know. But the fact that basically his love interest right now died, and we just kind of get like watery eyes, and that's it.
And it's for somebody this like morally driven and this caring. It's not even just his friends. I mean, you said his friends, but that's very key to him. But like he lets Paris live in this movie, and that's a person who was seconds before trying to murder him. Like complete strangers, he does the same thing for. There's a lot of great lines in this movie too. So to its credit, like at one point she says like, "Why would you?" He says, I can promise you that your life will matter more to me than my own. She says, "Why would you do that? We barely know each other." And he said, "Does it matter?" Like, that's what.
No, that was good.
That's what it means to Ethan Hunt. Like, he's a self-sacrificial person. He cares about other people.
Paris, that's a character. I feel like she was underused.
No,
she was so interesting, and like even I feel like they cut out even some of her like vocal parts. Like when she's driving and she like does that weird like laugh smile thing. We didn't even get to hear any of her audio of her like actually doing that. And yeah, I feel like she was underused the whole time. I was thinking like, I wish she was the main villain. Her character seems wild. She seems unhinged. She seems very capable. And she's obviously a fantastic actress as well.
I think it speaks volumes that I know her name, but I don't know Gabriel. I mean, I know her name more readily than I can recall the other villain, Gabriel. So I personally...
Morales? I think that's his name. I don't know.
The actor?
That's how you pronounce it.
We're still on acting, though, and I do want to say that since you bring up Paris, I think that might have been the best performance in the movie for me.
Really? I really liked Haley Atwell. I feel
she's up there as well.
I feel like she actually brought some emotion to the role.
Yeah.
And that's why I think, like, if you were to ask me, hey, who stood out to you? Who was the surprise? It would be her.
Yeah, I started to get frustrated with the writing of her character, but not so much with the acting. It's just the way that she kept running away from the only person who was trying to save her life.
Also, like,
at a certain point, I get it at the beginning, at a certain point, very frustrating.
Yeah, but what I was more confused on is why she kept running away with the key. What is she going to do with the key?
Everyone's fault.
She's just a thief.
She also seems like she's afraid in a lot of moments, like, of what is coming down on her because of the key. Like these people want to kill you, you know? It's
like just run away.
It's like
why does she keep stealing the key?
Nations, governments want to kill you, not like this one group.
Like
you know?
she doesn't have, I'm assuming, any more contacts of people who want to buy this key, right? Like they didn't make that known anyways.
Well, yeah, I mean, it's probably a very dangerous thing to even reach out about with the power of this.
Right. And it's not like she's probably going to find the keyhole on her own.
Yeah, it's at the bottom of the Bering Sea. Like, does she have a submarine that we don't know about?
Yeah, that's an interesting point. But I feel like her
performance was
good. Yeah.
Yeah, she was very good in the movie. She was a strength of the movie. I think those two are my absolute favorites. I mean, I really do love the performance for Ilsa Faust as well.
She's a great character.
Rebecca Ferguson.
Yeah.
I wish Rebecca Ferguson was in the rest of the movie because I think it's such a good character and a good performance. She's very sly. She's very cunning.
She won't be in part 2
unless
she comes back to life, which isn't really like the MO of Mission Impossible.
Yeah, it's not totally out.
And I don't want her to come back to life either.
It'd be frustrating at this point.
Because then what was the point?
But the acting landed at a 7 for me because of that. Because I think that some of it was just a little stoic. I wouldn't necessarily say wooden, but just it was missing like a spark.
Yeah.
It seemed maybe
just dynamic range.
Yeah.
You know, like what was performed was really good, but I want to see something more. I want to see something a little deeper. Cinematography is our next category. This is my favorite category to talk about. This is where we talk about the camera movement, the composition of what we actually see in the camera. We also kind of include like the special effects, the VFX, what we're seeing in the camera and how it's displayed to us. I have this one. The lighting also goes into this. That's a big thing. That's a part of cinematography. I have this at an 8 out of 10. I feel like it's very modern. The lights are awesome. I like how dark they were in the beginning in terms of the lighting. You know, like you literally couldn't see half his face. You know, like it was very dark, very cinematic kind of feel. And then when we're like in that club, like the colors were really nice and vivid. And then of course the camera movement I feel like is like something that this franchise is known for, you know, like a lot of the pans, a lot of the push-ins, like the camera's very rarely locked off on a tripod. It's always dynamic, you know, and something that I really like that they do is that they hold a shot really long, but not necessarily like a dialogue shot really long, but a shot where they show a guy in the airport, he picks up the luggage, the camera pans down to that, they take a few steps, and then someone else wipes across the screen, they follow their luggage, they set that luggage down, then we go up back to his face to reveal who it is. Like that's a 7, 8, 9, 10, 12-second clip, and they did that frequently throughout, and I really like that because that's something that you really have to think about. You know, it has to be done in one take most of the time. Sure, you can like kind of cut it, you know, behind different transitions or whatever, but it looks like it's a longer take, so a little bit, I don't want to say more thought goes into it, but more goes into executing that kind of shot. And I always try to bring those type of shots into my work. So that was really cool to see. Cinematography, 8 out of 10.
Yeah, to be clear to the audience, the average shot length in Hollywood is getting shorter and shorter. It's just easier to control what you put in there if it's shorter. I think the average shot length is something like 4 to 6 seconds. So a 7 to 10 second shot is long, and then beyond 10 seconds is just really quite long. It's impressive. Yep. So that's kind of what Aaron's talking about. But
like it helps you be in the world. You know,
oh, absolutely,
you get more
yeah.
Context of like what's going on. That's closer to how our eyes actually see things. You know,
to a certain degree, for me, the less cuts in the movie, the better. But to a degree,
yeah,
because it doesn't have to be Birdman.
Right.
But I gave this movie a 7.5 out of 10 for cinematography. So I think overall we've been pretty close so far.
So far, you've been a half a point under me for every category.
Sticking with you. But I think that I almost debated about giving it an 8, but for me, the major thing I want to talk about with this movie that was a frustration for me was all the tight shots. And I leaned over to you and said this during the movie was there was a lot of very close shots that I feel like is not indicative to me of like an action movie or of especially Mission Impossible, because you want to use a close-up shot to really display acting and show everything on the actor's face. For a movie like this where I want all the action captured in camera. I want to see like the room in its entirety. I want a lot of medium and wide shots. Like I was thinking this a lot in the room when they're discussing everything that's going on, explaining kind of the epilogue and the setup for the entity and everything with all these government officials in the room. A wide shot would have been so much more preferred for that. You just get like the scope of the room. You can cut around different angles in the room if you want to not do it all in like less takes.
You keep going back to that wide medium shot.
Yeah.
To like really
emphasize the
ground you of where you're at.
Yeah. And I felt like it's another thing that comes down to control. It's easy to control a close-up shot because there's not as much in camera. There's not as many other elements. But
it's also easier to control too if you're not actually on location.
Yeah. But it felt like the whole, I would say even throughout the rest of the movie, there
was a lot of really tight shots. That's when you actually like leaned over to me.
This is the exact wrong movie for that, in my opinion, is I want medium and wide shots establishing the different locations. They're in all kinds of different scenes in these movies.
Really quick in this movie, in all of the Mission Impossible movies. So having those establishing shots and even the medium shots in the middle of the conversation to really remind you of where they're at or where they are in relation to each other and whatnot really helps you gather the location changes. And I really like close-up shots. I don't know. I like seeing the little details of things. But I think I would actually agree with you on this. They were very close to their face on a lot of the dialogue scenes. And I feel like I would have benefited from seeing a little bit more of the room, seeing them actually interacting with each other with 2 or 3 of the actors, actresses on the screen at the same time. Because whenever they do a tight shot, it's most likely a separate performance than the wider shots or even the shots of who they're having a conversation with. Depending on how many cameras they have running at the same time, that they might, all right, now we're doing Tom Cruise close up and go. All right, now we're doing this person's close up and go. You know, and like when you have those wider shots, you can really see them interacting with each other. You know, like you said, the close-up shots are for the emotion, but we didn't really get to see them interact as much in their conversations with each other.
I like close-up shots used sparingly and effectively, and I didn't feel like that was the case in the beginning of this movie.
And I like close-up shots all the time.
Yeah.
But I also understand the importance of the establishing shots, the medium shots, and you're right, it was lacking.
I think that but this still came out to 7.5, which is a good score. And I think that the reason that carried this movie forward was just the way that they capture action in camera. Mm-hmm. I mean, some phenomenal shots. The shot that arcs over the top of him when he breaks to a halt at the edge of the canyon and shows like the huge, just cavernous, thousands of feet, hundreds of feet below is amazing.
And then as soon as you see that, you're like, holy crap, Tom Cruise actually rode this motorcycle off of this cliff.
That spot is
freaking insane.
That spot is just so amazing. And then knowing that it's a ramp and that they use special effects, like the special effects are so phenomenal because looking at it, I cannot tell that was ever a ramp. It just looks like a cliffside. And then the way that they keep that as like a long take with just panning to the side with him, following him up the mountain, and then following him over the edge as he just plummets down, hundreds of feet at hundreds of miles per hour. Like it's so phenomenal, and that wins me over. And then all the amazing shots from the car chase, which is, I think, like the best or along with him going off that ramp, the best sequence of action in the movie, filmed and in general. So yeah. I think that it has its strengths, but I was just frustrated to not see more. Like, and the other thing about the shots too is, like we talked about, they touched on the length, but with the action, like, I'm going to compare it again. The Halo jump is a continuous shot. It's amazing. It's long. It keeps you in it. The shots when he's on the side of the Burj Khalifa, it's cutting back to the room where Brandt or Jeremy Renner is talking with Benji and everyone, but it's doing so for a short time for them to say, hey, the clock's running out, and then it cuts back to Ethan. You're not helping, and he's still climbing the side. So it doesn't take me out of it with those short scenes. This was like, it cut from him riding the dirt bike to like long scenes full of those annoying close-up shots in the train car with Haley Atwell talking to the gentleman from the first Mission Impossible movie. Like, it was stayed away from him for a long time. So it super took me out of his journey to catch up with the train. It just felt like I wanted to stick with him. I wanted, especially once he was in the air, especially did I want to stick with him. I wanted to follow his journey from the air to the train.
Yeah,
100%.
way.
I wanted that so bad,
Yeah.
but we got none of that. So cutting to them was like, and then cutting to those, so many like tight angles in this movie. Like even that long fight in the narrow hallway, it was just so much like felt shrouded. And maybe part of that has to do with how this movie was filmed in relation to COVID. Maybe they didn't have as much access to like wider, bigger areas, or even always filming with other actors in the same room, like you said. We'll touch on that when we come to the end. I have like some notes about relating to that, explaining how this movie was affected by COVID.
I'm wondering how like often they were like on set versus in a studio too. Because when you leaned over and you're like, there's a lot of tight shots. They were in the airport specifically. And my first thought was like, you're right. There's a lot of close-ups. Maybe they're not actually there. You know, they're probably hiding something, because sometimes that's just what you got to do. You know, like you're spending a lot of money, which we'll get into the budget of this movie, and you don't want to waste it all on just this CGI airport. You know, like
we can talk about. I'll bring the COVID facts in when we talk about the budget, because they are related.
Our next category is sound design. This is where we go over the score, the soundtrack, the sound effects, and everything that you hear during the movie, which when being like a filmmaker and being someone who watches a bunch of movies, like the music, the sound design, it's half of the viewing experience.
Arron always says this. It's going to be, we're going to put this on a t-shirt one day.
Let's do it. I'm definitely not the first person to say that either. I'm definitely repeating that line.
We are copywriting that phrase for backseat directing. Dash Arron.
That's right.
Hashtag Wayne Gretzky, Michael Scott.
Yeah. But yeah, it's especially in a theater too, where you're like in like good sound system, you know, like sound design is really important. I really enjoyed the sound design of all the other movies for Mission Impossible, and I really enjoyed the sound design for this movie. I gave it a 9 out of 10.
So for this movie, I gave it an 8 out of 10. I feel like
similar ballpark.
Similar, yeah. The Lorne Balfe's score for this movie is amazing. We talked about it leaving the theater. It's one of the only things we talked about the movie. It's bounding. It's propulsive. It pushes you forward into the action. It carries you to the edge of your seat. I said it feels like I said it feels like a high school marching band or like a college marching band or a parade. But that's, I think, because it feels like you're at an event. Yeah. You know? And so when you hear like all those snares, it sounds like an army of snares. And it's very like it's just very draws you into feeling like it's an experience.
It like kind of gets you going too, you know, when they bring in the hints of the theme song.
They bring it in all the right moments too. That's another strength. Yeah. But it just sounds like such a large group playing together. So it's like, how can I not like be
There's
involved
energy behind it, which is exactly what this movie requires.
Yeah. I accepted all the punches and kick sounds and shooting sounds as well with no issues.
Yeah, definitely.
Cars.
Yeah, it's definitely gotten way less cheesy as the franchise has gone on. I think especially the first few. But even the fourth one, I think they had a little bit of cheesy sound effects.
Oh, I heard it. Ghost Protocol.
Stuff, you know, but I can get over that, you know. But in this one, the sound design, like when they're going through that tunnel and they're on top of the train, it felt like I was in that situation, you know, just the wind hurling past, you know, like them breathing and moving around and stuff. Like that sounded really good. And then also the split second we were with Tom Cruise when he's falling down the side, you know, and he's yelling.
You heard the sound of the wind.
Yeah.
I love that as well.
And
felt like I was there.
I'm curious if that shot where we're at a close up when he was falling was real or recreated.
But why would it be a close up if it was real? Just use ADR.
Well, they probably did. But his face was moving so much, like so much wind was pushing his face that it makes me feel like
it could be filmed in one of those like indoor skydiving places too.
I know, but it made me feel like it was real.
Yeah.
And that's what matters, right?
I was only frustrated watching that scene because I was like, why am I not watching him actually?
Oh, also all the car chases and stuff. The cars sounded amazing. You know, all the sound effects that we got to hear with that. So yeah, I really enjoyed the sound design. Anything else you want to say about sound design before we move on?
No, it brings us to our last category, rewatchability.
Second to last category, we have set and character design first.
I skipped a category.
Boom, boom. This one's out of 5, so this is like the design of like what they're wearing, the design of the locations that they're at, the the decision to shoot at said locations and whatnot. And I think I'm actually gonna change my score real quick as I was describing that. Okay, so I'm putting it at a 3.5 out of 5. I originally had it at 4, but the more I was just talking about it just then, I was like, I think I need to bring it down to 3.5. And I think mainly because of all the close shots that we were talking about.
Yeah.
We didn't get to see the set design as much. So yeah, that's where I'm sitting. Their uniforms, costumes look fine, looked good. But what did you think overall for the set and character design?
I also gave it a 3.5.
Okay, cool.
I like the outfits. I feel like they were memorable. I feel like Ethan's suit looked really good, as well as Haley Atwell's. I already talked about her vest and button up. I feel like those outfits all looked really good. They worked in the scenes that they were in. I thought that Paris had some really great outfits as well. The villain. I think that
Also the smoke when he was in the office and like popped.
Oh, that was really cool
The
visual.
mask on, like the mask looked really
Yeah.
cool. The smoke looked really cool.
it's cool how it accounted for the nose as well.
Yep.
I think that they're shooting like in Rome, so that's obviously amazing. It's, beautiful scenery. It looks great. But same thing as you. I don't think they used it quite as much as they should have. I mean, some of the very wide, landscape shots that they took for once that they were in the train sequence were incredibly beautiful. But again, it just feels like if you compare it to Fallout, it wasn't used quite as much.
Fallout felt very artistic.
Yeah.
And even the one before that, Rogue Nation, felt very artistic. This one felt, I don't want to say generic, but it felt more on that end than it did stylized as the last two. So now we can go into our last category here, and that is rewatchability. This is out of 5 points. So Andrew, if someone were to ask you to watch this movie 5 times, how many times would you say yes?
So I would say if you picked Mission Impossibles 3 through 6, I probably have to put any given one of them at a 4 or 5. But looking at Dead Reckoning, comparing it to the other ones, I would have to give it a 3 out of 5.
A 3 out of 5? I gave it a 2.5 out of 5.
It's very long, so I'll give you that.
Well, again, the length isn't what makes it hard to watch. It's the pacing or the progression of the story.
But when you have bad pacing, the length only makes that worse.
No, you're totally right.
It feels long. That's the problem.
Yeah.
Basically, not that it is long.
Right. Yeah.
I see what you're saying.
And I feel like I'm a little confused leaving the movie, so that I don't know if that makes me want to watch it again to figure it out, or if that takes away from me wanting to watch it again, because it was like, oh, that was kind of a confusing movie. Like, I don't really want to mess with it, So I figured like half the time I would say yes to rewatching this movie. Definitely lower than Fallout, and I'd say the one with the highest rewatchability for me is Ghost Protocol. That's definitely, bless you. That's definitely the one that I've seen the most out of all of the Mission Impossibles. Yeah. But Fallout was a lot of fun. I just finished that one yesterday, so I'd rewatch that one again. I mean, that one, I feel like both of those, Rogue Nation I liked, but not as much as those other two. But I feel like both of those have very iconic scenes.
Yeah. I think if you asked me,
not just really cool stunts, but the scenes themselves are iconic.
Yeah. I think as of today, I'd be most ready to rewatch Ghost Protocol right now. And I've watched all the movies, all of them relatively recently. So I agree. I think Ghost Protocol is probably still my favorite and still the most rewatchable. I don't know exactly where this one ranks, definitely below 3 to 6. But I just think that exact same things as you, just it could have been better paced. And I think they could have trimmed a lot of the fat. The opening sequence when I was watching the opening sequence, I budged you and I was like, we're about to get an awesome opening action sequence. But instead it's like 15 minutes of this Russian nuclear sub, and it's all establishing.
It's that long.
Okay. Maybe it was like 8 minutes. Yeah. But it's very long.
I didn't see how it was connected. I was a little confused of where this entity was. Like, was the entity in that other submarine? Was it in the submarine that everyone else is in? Like, I didn't really understand the dynamic. I mean, I kind of picked it up as the movie was going on, but I feel like it could have been explained a little bit better to make that opening scene better.
My problem is I spent the whole time in that opening like, when's the IMF going to show up? Like I thought they were coming to
They pull off their masks.
Yeah, I thought they were coming to they were doing a mission on this. Like traditionally, they start these movies with like a sequence, like them going after the plane in Ghost Protocol, or he escapes the prison in prison. He escapes the prison in Ghost Protocol, and they jump onto the plane in Rogue Nation.
And it's okay for movies to change, like, and do something different, but
it left me disappointed.
Yeah,
personally, I just feel like it was so long into the movie, in my opinion, before they showed up. All these random Russian characters who inevitably died. I did not like that opening. I was already like, it's not a good note to start off on for me.
For me, it was a cool opening. It just wasn't explained or connected well enough to the rest of the movie to justify it.
I feel like
the opening scene.
I feel like there's no way that scene needed to be that long, and the only reason it was that long is because they knew they were making a part 2. Otherwise, if this was all in one movie, they for sure would have had to trim that down and been like, all right, let's get this done in 3 minutes.
Yeah, and it should have been one movie. I feel like. I mean, we haven't seen the second one, obviously, but I feel like I would have enjoyed this better if it was one complete movie.
I feel like they're fitting in more action sequences, but the same amount of story that would have been in one movie, personally.
Yeah.
Which I like more action sequences, but I just feel like story is king. You know, people are always saying that. I feel like story has to come first, and
I feel like that's why everyone likes Mission Impossible so much, because the story's been there.
Yeah.
You know, it's been relatable. It's been good.
But what does this bring your total score to?
This brings my score to a 7.4 out of 10, which is right around where some of the other movies lie on like IMDb and stuff.
It's like a flat C.
Yeah, so that's not too bad. I feel like
my score.
I feel like this is where most movies live, and because
the movie graveyard.
Yeah, well, I don't think it's necessarily a bad thing. You know, I feel like since we have the A, B, C, D, E, F scale, that it kind of skews your perception, you know, like, oh, like that's a C movie. Well, no, I feel like a lot of good movies are in that like 6.5 to maybe even almost 8 range. And then above 8 is like, that's a fantastic movie. And then anything below 5, that's kind of like, you know, like.
I mean, if you're in the 70th percentile of height, you're like you're a good height.
Yeah.
You know?
So I feel like when you put a letter grade to it as if we were in school, it kind of lowers maybe the perception of it. But I think a 7.4 is solid, and I'm actually surprised it was that high.
Yeah.
I think I would have ranked it a little bit lower, and I think the sound design and cinematography is what really like kind of brought that score back up for me.
Yeah, I think with my totals, it came out pretty true to how I feel about the movie, which is a little bit lukewarm, but my total came out to a 7.0 exactly.
Okay, yeah, pretty close.
Definitely not a bad movie by any means, and I have more reason than most, random citizens to talk this up, because we have a bet going, and I really want to win our box office draft. I have this movie on my team for our box office draft. I want everyone to go see it, but this is where my honest opinion lies for the movie. I couldn't just give it a 10 out of 10.
Did you like it better than Indiana Jones?
Yes.
Okay, that was a big yes.
It was not a competition. Indiana Jones was not in the running.
All right, well, that's for a topic of another conversation. Let's get into the budget of this movie, and then we'll go into the creators who was behind and in front of the camera, and then we can kind of finish with like what we would change about the movie, or maybe any facts that we may have about the movie. The budget for this movie, Andrew, it's giant. We have a movie that had a $290 million estimated budget. That's really high, right?
Yeah, it's the highest budgeted movie of Tom Cruise's career. And of the Mission Impossible franchise as well.
By a lot.
Yeah.
The second highest was Fallout, and that was at 178 million.
So
this is what, over 100 million more? That's crazy. Are prices just that much more expensive?
Well,
or are they just not spending it as wide?
So here's part of the reason why, and this is something I hinted at when we talked earlier, is that the pandemic drastically affected filming of this movie, because they started filming Dead Reckoning in February of 2020.
Oh,
which is a really bad time to start filming a movie. If you don't recall, March is when everything started to really hit the U.S. and it was spreading really.
And then April's when I lost my job and had to move. And all that. That's when it like got really dark for me personally. So that's like 2 months away from that.
Yeah. So this movie got rocked pretty hard by that. They started in February. I think they started filming somewhere in Italy, and they had to shut down filming because of the pandemic. So they moved to Rome. And then they quickly had to shut down filming again. There was one point in time where I think between 9 and 15 members of the cast and crew all tested positive for COVID.
Oh, this is the movie where Tom Cruise was yelling at his
Oh,
crew.
somebody for not following guidelines.
Yeah.
Well, not only the guidelines were making, guidelines do make things more difficult, but when guidelines aren't followed and people get sick, it was drastically affecting production of this movie, which is making things more expensive, making it take longer for it to come out, and just making everybody's life more difficult on set.
At that time, it was like minimum 14 days quarantine.
Yeah.
And then like, at least for our job where we were working, you had to test negative. And we come to find out that sometimes once you test positive, it's hard to get a negative test after the fact. So like that could waste even more time in a production like this.
So this ballooned their budget up to that $290 million,
so that
all
makes
the stuff
sense.
related to this. And then, which is crazy because even movies coming out now in 2023 were still affected by this. But on top of that, it leads to an interesting story where Tom Cruise actually spent 500,000 euros. He bought an old retired cruise ship in order to isolate the staff. So it was basically like purchasing a hotel, and the cast and crew lived there for some of the international filming. 500,000 euros.
Jeez. What is that in the American dollar? The freedom units. Please tell me.
The freedom units.
I don't know how much a euro is in comparison. I also don't know how to wrap my head around 500,000 as a number.
I think it's relatively close. Yeah, it says it's 557,000 US dollars.
So right around the same. That's crazy. Could you imagine just being like, oh man, this isn't going the way that I want it to? Boom, I'm going to buy a cruise ship and that'll solve all our problems. Man, that's crazy.
That's it. He spent that of his personal money.
That's wild.
Actually, I think it was pounds, not euros, but either way, I think the British currency and the euro, I believe are relatively close to each other. Don't quote me on world affairs.
So Andrew, let's move on to our next segment of the show, and that is going to be the creators. So who is behind and in front of the camera for Mission Impossible Dead Reckoning Part 1?
So we'll normally start with who's behind the camera first. So that leads us to our director, Christopher McQuarrie. Christopher McQuarrie has directed the last 2 Mission Impossible films before this, with Rogue Nation and Fallout. He's also worked on a number of other films with Tom Cruise in different capacities, whether as a director or a writer. He worked on The Mummy with him as well. And then, which actually is a common factor for quite a few of these people working on the Mission Impossible films. He seems to like to bring people with him, which is great.
A lot of studios and productions kind of do that, like Christopher Nolan. A lot
Works with
of
the same team,
actors
yeah.
are in his movies, yeah.
And then he likes to stick with cinematographers as well.
Yep.
And then the writing for Dead Reckoning was Brooke Geller, Eric Jendrison, and then Christopher McQuarrie again.
Isn't it Bruce Geller? You said Brooke.
Well, maybe I had autocorrect get me there. It gets me sometimes in my notes app.
I think it's Bruce.
You want to double check that while I go on? And then
I'm looking at IMDb.
Oh, then why are you saying
I don't know why I said
I know it's Bruce.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I don't know.
Trying to be nice to my feelings.
Maybe they got it wrong too. I don't know. I never
IMDb
met
got
the
it
guy.
wrong. Hey, IMDb can make mistakes just like me. All right. And then our cinematographer is Fraser Taggart. Our music is by Lorne Balfe, who I've already mentioned. He did the music for the last movie in Fallout, and then a ton of other action movies. Like you can look back at Lorne Balfe's cinematography, even going as far as like video games. He's kind of an icon in action movie cinema for doing. I think he did Bad Boys for Life as well. There's too many to name. And then under editing, we had Eddie Hamilton as this movie's editor. And then let's look at our cast, which we all know. Starring in this movie is the man, the myth, the legend, Tom Cruise as Ethan Hunt.
Never heard of him.
Yeah, I think he was in a few independent pictures. Haley Atwell is Grace. You'll recognize her as Peggy Carter if you watch Marvel movies. Ving Rhames is Luther Strickle, who you will recognize from Pulp Fiction if you watch Tarantino movies. Simon Pegg is Benji Dunn, who you will recognize as Shaun from Shaun of the Dead, if you watch Edgar Wright movies, who is a phenomenal director. Rebecca Ferguson is Ilsa Faust, and Palm Clementine is Paris. To me, steals the show in this movie. You'll recognize her as Mantis if you watch Marvel movies also.
Yeah, I feel like she doesn't steal the show from me just because she was underused.
I wish she was
But
used
the
more.
part that she did get to display was very well done, and her character looks the most unique.
Yeah, her
Like
look, her
face
personality.
paint, and just her, like how she had that little sword or cane or whatever. Like, she was just really cool. She seemed like she had a lot of depth and like tragedy to her that we really didn't get to explore. I really wish that she'd be coming back for the next one and that we got more of her.
Because there's so much.
She, I think, was alive at the end. I think they said that she had a pulse or whatever.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
She
But
I didn't
still.
notice that. She clearly was this interesting, complex character because she had like a love for mayhem and carnage. But then when Ethan spared her, she really like acknowledged and respected that. Because a person who's just true chaos would be like, another shot at him. But she valued that, like almost as if nobody in her life maybe had ever shown her that much kindness.
She also just got betrayed by the person that she was following, Gabriel.
Yeah. And she, what's the next thing she went and did was she journeyed into a crashing train car to make this huge self-sacrificial effort potentially to save Ethan Hunt and Grace. So I think she had a lot of depth to her that we just, like you said, we didn't get to explore those depths, but I still felt from what she showed, like just so much of a performance with what little screen time they gave her. Like when Ethan hits the pole against the wall and spares her, you could see on her face that she was like, thinking, why did he do that? This I owe him my life now.
Mercy. Yeah.
She knows she wouldn't have. So you could see gears turning. And I just think that as an actress, she displayed all that really well.
You know, I was thinking while you were talking about that scene where she came in and saved them from falling from the train, I feel like it would be fun, like once the channel grows a little bit and stuff, for us to do like these off kind of series where we try to like recreate little parts of stunts. Like just holding someone while holding onto a bar with one hand.
That's so impossible.
Like-
the way that her bar broke away, and he's now
and then catches them.
Yeah, he unexpectedly has to catch her with one hand and hold himself.
Torn bicep.
I'm telling you, impossible.
Torn shoulder, for sure. But like that'd be something fun. Maybe like let us know in the comments if that'd be something fun for you to see, like normal regular guys try stunts
Stunts
in
on a
movies.
budget.
Yeah.
We'll do a stunts on a budget series.
I think that'd be a lot of fun, you know, and it'd be a different type of episode, you know.
Oh yeah.
But yeah, anyways, let's continue back
that-
to the
that-
creators.
That covers all of who's in front of him behind the camera. That closes out. I mean, there's obviously other cast members in the movie.
Sure.
I didn't even name the villain because I didn't feel that strongly about Gabriel, but you said his name earlier.
I did. Okay. So
Also, we brought back a star in this movie from the original Mission Impossible movie. So Asai Morales is Gabriel, and we brought back Henry Czerny as Kittredge. Kittredge was in the very first Mission Impossible movie in 1996, so it was cool to see him come back. I think Degas, who was another character played by Greg Tarzan Davis, is going to be a big character in the next movie, just from the way he seems to be wavering onto
questioning,
Ethan Hunt's team.
Yeah. You said that in the theater.
Oh, and I'm sorry. I every time Aaron goes to talk, I
We're
cut him off
done
and
with
continue
the
actress.
creators
I'm so
section.
sorry. But Carrie Yules, I think is how I say his last name. He plays Denlinger, who's like the Secretary of State or some high official who dies. Spoiler. Again. But he
Does he die?
Paris and Gabriel kill him.
That guy.
But he is a very big actor as well. I mean, very famously from Princess Bride and a bunch of other movies. So it was cool to see him in this movie, but it felt like another underutilized throwaway character to me.
Yeah, I would agree.
Felt like a waste.
Yeah, I wish we got to see more. There was
He's in Psych. Do you remember him?
He looked familiar to me.
He plays the guy who's always getting one over on them, like the Canadian thief.
Okay.
You do?
Yes.
Yes, that's him.
Yes.
He's in
I
like
remember.
recurring episodes.
Yep. I remember him now. Yeah.
They're like Canadian 007,
Yep. You're so right. And they thought he was so cool, and so did I.
but not in this movie.
Yeah. Well, he was still cool in the movie, but like you said, there was just
okay.
they were juggling a lot
Too much.
characters, which they normally do.
Phenomenally, they do. That's their
Secret
flagship.
sauce,
Yeah.
I wonder how much COVID did like affect not only their like schedule, but also the story.
I think it played a drastic role because this to me was not on par. And I'll be so frustrated if it doesn't make a lot of money for my box office draft because of this. Not because of me saying this, obviously, because I'm not that important, but because of
We're
like the way that
people that give us 100 views. So, like that's probably 20 people.
Yeah.
But what was my next point? Oh, on Threads earlier this week, I posted that I think that this will make $700 million. I don't know if it'll get there,
The reviews are still really high. It mattered.
but it's literally day one, maybe day two.
We'll see. We're here early. We're here for early
Very
viewing.
early.
This movie, you could see it.
I
As
will
early as,
say
like,
the
Monday.
theater for the time that we went, and it being a Wednesday, there was a decent amount of people there.
A random Wednesday at 4:00. I expected it to be
And-
maybe us and one other person
Yeah,
because we
and
never
we
get
were
it alone.
in the smaller theater too, in the smaller like booth or whatever.
I thought that boded well for the movie.
Yeah,
Well, now that we're kind of coming to an end, we have two main things to talk about, which is our backseat directing segment. And I also want to talk to you about favorite stunts and sequences in this movie and then how that compares to the franchise. So what do you want to talk about first?
let's go over the stunts first. One, just jumping off that cliff. What?
Oh,
I
it's
can't
amazing.
even like comprehend that. And I feel like the movie, I guess we're kind of going in backseat directing here too, which we've already talked about, didn't let us comprehend what Tom Cruise actually did for this.
I feel like it's impossible in my brain to untangle the fact of what I'm watching from him really doing it in real life. So I feel like that really elevated it, but they just didn't ride with it long enough for me.
Yes, I agree. I feel like you said earlier, we mentioned it, we should have been with Ethan Hunt the entire
Journey.
ride
I
to
felt a
the
pit.
train.
I felt a pit in my stomach for them showing him drop and just descend into
Yeah.
into it basically looked like he's just going into hell, like so crazy.
We did I asked you a question on our last episode covering Mission Impossible, again, 103. I asked you, what are some of the stunts that you'd be willing to do in a movie? So I'm going to ask you, not if you would do this stunt, but how high off of something would you jump?
10 feet, 15 feet.
Yeah, I feel like anything higher than that, like, no, thank you.
Yeah, no.
Would you skydive? Because that's
I
also a really high jump.
So I have skydived before, but
Okay.
when you skydive for the first time, you're attached to a professional.
Yeah.
So I've never done it on my own. I potentially would skydive. I do think it's a lot of fun. It's very, very scary. I won't downplay that at all. But I potentially would.
There's a lot more that can go wrong from the jump that he did.
Very different than just skydiving,
skydiving.
for sure. Yeah.
A lot more variables.
He has to separate from the bike correctly. He has to come off the launch correctly with the correct speed and the correct angle. So it's way more complicated.
Rest in peace to all those bikes that they just
however
threw
many
off the
takes.
cliff.
Poor
I think they
bikes.
said they did it 6 times. So 6 different bikes.
Isn't it terrifying enough to do it once?
Right?
I think so. I don't know
About
what.
to
So,
die, so we gotta be careful.
okay, so my favorite sequence in this movie in particular is the train. The end sequence with the train probably comes out as my favorite, which I think my favorite sequence very easily should have been like the gliding or the or his jump off with the bike, but I just think we didn't get enough of it. We got a lot of time with the train as it was crumbling, and so that turned out to be my favorite sequence, followed by driving. The just the added element of him being handcuffed to Haley Atwell's character made that so much more entertaining and so much more complex than if it was just another driving sequence. They added that unique element, something I feel like I've never seen before in a movie, and it made it really special. Plus, like driving down the stairs and everything was just phenomenal. Being in Rome, the location was amazing. But
You know what they did? This kind of reminds me of backseat directing spot right here, and I want to talk about it right now because
Let's do it.
It's coming to mind. They cut a lot in this movie, like you said, from the jump, and then they cut somewhere else. We're on the train, and then he just busts through the window. They did it with the car. He was trying to unhandcuff himself. They cut to the car getting hit, and then they show him off to the side. Like they didn't actually show us.
with the train.
So they did kind of the same thing. I feel like that was a theme throughout this, is they didn't show us how things happen. They just
It's the exact opposite of what they're known for, which is the first.
But then also kind of continuing the backseat directing real quick is the the travel. I didn't understand how everyone was like getting to these places.
I understand how
at some
everyone
points.
knew where everyone was,
Yes.
especially the CIA. Like they were
Yes.
like, oh, basically they're following the White Widow, but like, okay, you're just telling us you're following the White Widow to get to everyone else. How are
Yes.
you doing that?
Yeah, exactly.
It was too much for them to explain, but also it was just so out there to not explain it. Seemed like a plot hole, basically.
Yeah, I agree.
We can stick with backseat directing unless,
That was kind of it from things that we haven't already talked about.
yeah, because I would just be repeating myself for backseat directing too, which
Yeah.
is, you know, the close-up shots, some of the way they held the shots. But what was your favorite stunt in the movie? Or how would you rank like maybe your top 3?
I mean, I would say definitely him jumping off of the cliff with the bike.
I feel like it's an easy
But-
number 1, but I feel like it got pushed down to 3 for me because I expected it. Just my
Yeah,
expectations for it were more
I feel like I can't get it out of my head that he actually did it.
Yeah.
Whether we got to see it as well as I would have wanted or not, it's still the main stunt that I would not want to do.
Yeah.
You know, so therefore I feel like the most respect for it. The fights were all really cool, I think. Besides the one with Elsa
Elsa.
and Gabriel, I feel like she had a sword and he had a Peter Pan knife. Like, how is she?
Peter Pan.
How is she not striking him? You know,
I personally feel like she should have beat his ass, but I really like Elsa Fast as a character a lot, so I'm like on her.
I feel like she should have been able to give some damage, right? Because just the distance that you have, the distance advantage you have with a sword.
Well, her
or
in
a knife,
particular,
like,
the incredible stuff we've seen her do, the takedown in Rogue Nation when
she's
that guy approaches her and she's
literally
Rey
Black Widow.
Mysterio's in.
Like,
yeah.
I love how she gets like really close and personal and uses the momentum of her body and her opponents to like throw them to the ground. She's kind of like Spider-Man, you know,
Yeah.
climbing on them and throwing them all over. I felt like when they were fighting, I was like, man, she's gonna die.
Well, they built it
like-
very clearly. Yeah. There
I
was,
felt like her hits weren't landing at all and that she was just missing, but there was no reason for her to be missing. She wasn't emotionally compromised. She wasn't physically compromised. So I just felt like it wasn't there, you know, which
Yeah.
kind of again took away from her death just a little bit for me. But all the other fights and stuff I feel like were really cool.
yeah, her death.
Like John Wick at sometimes.
I feel like her death should have been the absolute biggest thing in the movie, and I kind of feel like
It
it
should have
wasn't.
destroyed me. And
Yeah.
it kind of
It should have just it didn't destroy Ethan.
Yeah.
So how can it destroy you?
Right.
If it didn't destroy the person who's supposedly in love with her.
Exactly. That's exactly it. That's what we were missing from it for sure. And maybe the struggle in that fight as well. We got to see her just completely losing. You know,
Yeah.
she didn't have any wins in that fight really. Which
I feel like
was unfortunate.
we should have got to see Ethan feel completely helpless in that moment instead, which I feel like I guess he kind of did because he was told what was going to happen before it happened. But maybe if he was just had a more up close and personal nature to the actual act itself, and then a chance to capture that response to that on screen, on camera.
Yeah. Overall, good movie. I think the big takeaway from both of us is that it should have just been its own movie.
Yeah.
And not spread out into part 1, part 2.
But make sure you go see it so that you can understand part 2.
Yeah. It definitely will be streaming on Paramount Plus, so you can wait till then if you'd like. Yeah. You don't have to go see it in theaters, you know. Don't spend your money.
Don't listen, Aaron. One thing I do want to explain before we get off, just in case there's any confusion, because I feel like this movie does kind of reach back. We already discussed the returning character of Kittredge. He is a government official in the first movie. Another thing that's important for this movie, which, you know, this would just kind of be for people after the fact, because I'm assuming if you've made it this far, you've already watched it. But the White Widow and her brother, if you don't already know this, are children of a man named Max. Max is a villain who's trying to buy the knock list, the list of undercover agents in the first movie. So, and they're also returning from Fallout, the previous movie. So that's just for your understanding of where they come from. And also, if you haven't watched Fallout recently, the reason she's calling him John Lark is because that was a cover name he was using to pretend to be the leader of the syndicate in the previous movie in Fallout. I feel like that could definitely be confusing if you haven't just rewatched the movies recently. So if you're sitting here watching this like, I don't know why she kept saying that, I figured I'd toss that in too.
Yeah, I would have definitely been lost if I didn't like literally just watched it the day before.
Me too, yeah. I was thinking that.
And when we were watching it too, I was thinking like, oh wow, that could be confusing.
And they said a line earlier too. They were like, does she know about you, or does she still think you're John Lark? And that would be confusing as well if you didn't have all that backstory.
Yeah. Something that would have improved my movie theater experience would have been getting something to eat during the
Something
movie.
for me would have been if the chairs were better.
Popcorn or some candy, or even we've been going to Cinema 6 and we weren't able to go there this time.
I offered to buy you some popcorn. You know I'll take care of you.
I know, but I didn't want it. I wanted it, but I didn't want it. I just want you to know what I want, Andrew.
Oh my God.
But yeah, so it's a longer movie, so grab your snacks. I'd recommend it.
I think the main thing in my closing remarks would be that this movie is only disappointing if you go into it with very high expectations. It is a very spectacular, phenomenal thrill ride. It's huge, big stunts and big action.
We've been overhyping this to ourselves.
Yeah, we've been very excited. And having just watched the recent 3 movies, getting ourselves all excited.
We've been talking about it every day for a week at the least, you know.
I've been texting you like every 12 hours, like, are you excited?
Yeah.
Are you ready?
Yeah.
This is like my most anticipated movie of the whole year.
Today at work went by so slow.
Yeah. This was definitely my most anticipated movie of the year. I don't know about you, but I think it was for me, even over Barbenheimer.
Yeah, I think you did say that actually in earlier movie.
I just expected like so much from the stunts and everything. So my expectations were incredibly high, but you're going to see some really cool stuff.
Yeah, especially coming off of Top Gun Maverick as well. Like, that was one of my favorite movies from last year, and probably in my top 50 movies of all time, maybe even higher, probably 20. But like, I love that movie, and the Tom Cruise hype has probably never been bigger.
Oh yeah, and he's like 60, and it's just growing.
Yeah,
but
insane.
Yeah, I feel like the expectations do affect movie viewings a lot, so take that into account. But I do want to thank everybody that's listened this far. Thank you so much. A few notes that I want to touch on. We do have t-shirts for sale. We have merch for sale on our Etsy store, so you can check us out on there under Backseat Directing. We got the classic Backseat Directing tee with our logo on if you'd like to purchase one. We do post new episodes every Monday and Thursday, along with new content on all of our social media apps, or basically any social media app you can think of. We're on Threads now if you want to check us out on there. We make those posts every day of the week, so make sure to check us out on those. Make sure to share us with a friend. Make sure to like, rate, review, follow, subscribe, anywhere you can.
And sharing with a friend is the biggest thing that'll help. You know, like the more, like if you're watching the show and you comment on the episode, we're very grateful for that. But sharing the episode with 1 or 2 of your friends, like that's how we can kind of like build this community of movie, shows, games, comic lovers, to where we can talk about this more and more with more and more people. So share the episode, share the smaller clips from our like TikToks and Instagrams and all that. That'll help us out a lot. We appreciate your attention. We know that there's a lot of things asking for your attention, so we're very grateful that we're able to capture your attention for as long as we have. And
that's a wrap.